how did they represent the disenfranchised at these ratifying conventions?
Well, there's no way to deny the fact that the people who could vote at the time were largely white landowning males. But however, we have to look at the context of that time period. 8 states either relaxed or abolished property requirements, and this was a huge expansion of the enfranchisement. And it was just for ratification conventions. In fact, in New York, which is arguably the most heavily contended of all the states, property requirements were actually completely abolished for the purposes of ratifying the Constitution.
At the Philadelphia Convention, there were abolitionists and there were people who defended plantation slavery. And ultimately, what the Constitution is a product of is a compromise, but ultimately the founders understood that you would have to adapt this document to changing circumstances. And so they instituted Article 5. And the process of amendment to the Constitution, we see this exemplified in the 19th Amendment, which expands the suffrage to women, and other such amendments, which have expanded the Constitution to adapt to the American populace as it changes over time.
Robert Yates and Brutus One argued that once a government operates at a distance from the citizenry, they lose touch. That government loses touch to the character and wishes of that citizenry. With the advent of social media, with the internet, Twitter, and all of the different types of communications we have today, how do you think those fears were either addressed or have remained unaddressed?
I think today that argument is still relevant in the sense that state government, Robert Yates's rationale was that state governments would be more aware of the people's needs, and local governments even more so. And for instance, that's why education is often left up to state governments. You have programs such as Race to the Top and NCLV, which establish thresholds, but ultimately the curriculum is left up to states. And matters such as education are essential, need to be left up to school districts and more local governments because they understand the demographics of the people more clearly.
I would disagree with my unit mate, Winston Chang. I believe that media is dangerous to the community. In fact, in a recent poll, it states that 60% of people do not know that Stephen Colbert is merely a comedian.
Also, biased news sources such as Fox News and CNN actually sway the public into believing something that they're not able to decide for themselves. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. In what ways do you think that the limitations on national and state governments help protect the common good?
I think to answer the part of your question regarding the state governments, you can look to Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution. The 3 provisions prevent states from, clauses 2 and 3 prevent states from imposing taxes and housing militias, raising their own armies, and declaring war and establishing treaties with foreign nations. And this clearly provides for the common good because if you look back to the period of time before the Constitution's ratification, there were conflicts erupting between New York and New Jersey because New York, as an exporting state, would impose excessive taxes and duties, and so this sort of conflict had to be had to be resolved by this particular part of the Constitution.
At the same time, I think that a way to check national government in order to ensure our common good can be seen in the preamble of the Constitution. It says that we the people, in order to create a more perfect union, they must ensure general welfare. Therefore, I believe that since the Constitution is in America, the rule of law, in which all governments are below the Constitution, it must benefit the community.
On a national level, I would say that just the checks and balances system alone protects the natural rights of the citizenry, because one branch of government is unable to take absolute and total control and violate those natural rights.
Do you think that the checks and balances system has sustained over time, or do you think that's changed?
I think that the checks and balances have sustained. In fact, in the Line Item Veto Act, in which President Clinton strive to, in a sense, take some of legislative power by being able to take a bill and actually go line by line and accept some parts and reject another part. Essentially, this was checked by the Supreme Court, in which in Clinton versus City of New York, in which they rejected this act.
I would argue that certain aspects of the checks and balances have been violated, such as the 1971 case when President Richard M. Nixon, he declared some provisions of the military procurement bill as unconstitutional, and he refused to abide by these even though it had been passed as a law.
Idealistically, I would like to say that checks and balances have been preserved throughout history up till the current day, but Honestly, I believe that the expansion of executive power at the expense of the legislative branch, and as my unit pointed out, even in the Supreme Court, has violated this principle. Former President George W. Bush had 763 signing statements, and these particular powers of the president, the signing statement, for instance, have been deemed or have been perceived as unconstitutional because they grant to the president the ability to interpret what is passed out of the legislation.
Not only that, the War Powers Resolution has also given the executive considerably more power than or was originally delegated to him. If you look at the initial document, says that we would give the president 60 days to engage in foreign conflicts before Congress would have to stop that. However, Crockett versus Reagan actually destroyed that and said the Supreme Court ruled that that's a matter between Congress and the president, and if Congress is happy, then the president can stay in any kind of foreign conflict for as long as he would like.
Okay, thank you.
How was